It all began on one of the coldest mornings of the year, a morning that bit into the bones and stilled the breath in your chest. A single father, Jack Avery, opened the creaking wooden door of his remote mountain cabin, expecting nothing more than another day of solitude. But what he found standing in the snow would change the course of his life forever. A woman, a widow, with 4 young children huddled behind her, stranded in the middle of nowhere, their breaths curling in the frozen air like smoke. In that moment, Jack had no way of knowing that opening that door wouldn't just offer them shelter. It would rewrite the very path his life had been trudging along in silence. Before we step into this quietly powerful story, a journey stitched together by resilience, unexpected love, and the kind of miracles that whisper rather than roar, if you believe in the kind of goodness that can change lives, you're in the right place. Stories like this are meant for hearts that still believe in the strength of compassion. The first snowfall had arrived far earlier than expected that year, smothering the rugged Montana mountains under a thick, silencing blanket. Everything seemed paused, as though the earth itself had taken a breath and forgotten to let it out. Jack stood on the creaky front porch of his time-worn cabin, his hands buried deep into the threadbare pockets of an old flannel coat that smelled faintly of pine smoke and loneliness. He watched as the sky turned from grey to ink, the woods behind him wrapped in hush. He hadn't seen another human being in days, and to be honest, that used to comfort him. After Lydia died, his wife his anchor, solitude became his survival. Being alone meant not having to explain the grief that had hollowed him out. It meant never having to mask the daily breaking of his spirit. But then, he heard something. A sound. Distant. Wrong. Unnatural. His body tensed as he squinted into the snowfall, watching a pair of headlights flicker through the thickening dusk. The lights swerved, then jerked to the side with a screeching crunch. Metal meeting ice in a sickening union. And then, stillness. Without thinking, Jack snatched up his flashlight and tugged on his coat. "Bandit," he called to the aging dog who limped faithfully behind him, their familiar routine upended by urgency. As he made his way through the biting wind and thick snow, each step groaning beneath his boots, it felt like the storm itself was trying to speak to him, trying to warn him. At a bend in the road, half buried in the snowbank, sat a small SUV. The engine was dead. Inside, silhouettes moved. A woman in the front seat, children packed into the back like fragile dolls wrapped in too thin layers. Jack tapped gently on the frosted window. The woman jumped, her eyes wide, wary. She cracked the window just an inch. "You all right?" Jack asked gently, trying to sound more like help than harm. "We're okay, I think." Her eyes darted to the kids behind her. "But the car died an hour ago. We were trying to get down the mountain before the snow trapped us." "You won't make it now," Jack said, his voice steady but firm. "Not in this weather. I've got a cabin up the ridge. It's warm. There's food. You can come with me." She hesitated. Jack could feel her weighing everything, the risk, the fear, the stranger in front of her. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said softly, "but it's dropping fast out here. Your kids are shivering." One of the youngest children had his face pressed to the glass, cheeks flushed with cold, lips trembling. That image settled something in her. She gave a small nod. "Okay, thank you." They emerged from the vehicle, one by one, bundled in mismatched layers. 2 boys, 2 girls, none older than 10. Jack didn't ask their names. He didn't need to. He just offered his hand to the smallest and began the uphill trek. Behind them, the woman, Rachel, carried a single duffel bag and the kind of exhaustion that went deeper than sleepless nights. When they reached the cabin, Jack pushed open the heavy wooden door, letting the warmth spill out like an embrace. The children stepped in slowly, blinking at the unfamiliar comfort. Bandit curled by the fire, his tail thudding once, maybe twice. Jack handed out blankets, thick socks, even Lydia's old mittens, relics of a life he hadn't touched in years. Survival now mattered more than sentiment. Rachel said little, her voice caught between gratitude and wariness, her eyes watching everything. When Jack ladled out the soup he'd made for himself and his silent son Caleb, she seemed to exhale just slightly. She knelt beside her youngest, whispering reassurances, rubbing frozen fingers. There was something in her posture, tight, determined. She wasn't just tired. She was fighting with every scrap of her being to hold her family together. Jack saw it, and he respected it. Later that night, after the children had fallen asleep in a jumbled pile of blankets near the fire, Jack found Rachel standing at the window. "You want to tell me what brought you here?" he asked gently. Her voice was low. "We were heading to Boise. I had a teaching job lined up, music, but it fell through. We've been bouncing from shelter to shelter. This was supposed to be a new start." "Driving up a mountain in a snowstorm?" Jack asked, half smiling. "I didn't think it would snow this early," she said, "but we were out of options." Jack understood that too well. He poured her a mug of tea, slid it across the table. She accepted it with a quiet thank you. Jack shrugged. "You needed help. People don't stop much anymore. Not like this." He looked at her. "Maybe we need to start again." From the corner, Caleb watched them both, silent as ever. "He hasn't spoken since Lydia died," Jack said quietly. Rachel's gaze lingered on the boy. "He's got kind eyes." "He gets that from his mom," Jack said, voice catching. The silence that followed was different now. Not heavy, not empty, just quiet, shared. By morning, frost painted the windows like delicate warnings. Jack stirred powdered eggs and canned ham over the stove. Not fancy, but hot. Behind him, the cabin buzzed with new energy. Rachel moved with practiced grace, guiding her children, calming them with soft commands. She didn't wait to be offered anything. She helped. She folded herself into the rhythm of the cabin like she'd always belonged. Jack noticed. At the table, Caleb sat stiffly, sketchpad in his lap. Jack placed a plate beside him. "Eat when you're ready," he murmured. Caleb didn't look up, but he picked up the fork. Jack exhaled softly. Progress. After breakfast, Rachel began cleaning, organizing, as if it were her home. "You don't have to do all that," Jack said. "I know," she replied simply, "but it helps." And he understood that too. Doing was surviving. Waiting meant drowning. When Jack mentioned needing to check on a neighbor, an elderly woman living alone, Rachel didn't flinch. "Go," she said. "We'll be okay." "You sure?" "I've lived through worse," she said. "No drama, just truth." When he returned hours later, wind-chapped and bleeding from a cut on his hand, something new greeted him. Laughter. Real laughter. The cabin smelled like cinnamon. The children were gathered around Caleb, who, astonishingly, was showing them his drawings. Rachel, flour on her nose, sleeves rolled, stood at the stove. "You turned my cabin into a bakery," Jack said, stunned. She grinned. "Found some old flour, baking powder, and a tin of nutmeg from the Stone Age." He bit into the dense, slightly burnt bread she handed him. It tasted like care, like effort. "It's the best thing I've had in years," he said honestly. That night they sat by the dim lamp, alone again after the children slept. Rachel spoke of her husband's sudden death, the downward spiral, the desperation, the storm. "Last night," she whispered, "I prayed for kindness, for somewhere safe." Jack stirred his tea. "You found a broken man in a wooden box." Rachel met his eyes. "You opened the door." He swallowed hard. "You carried them. I just lit the fire." And then, for the first time, she laughed. Soft, fragile. But it melted the ice between them. Jack looked at her, not as a burden, not as a stranger, but as someone who'd survived hell and still stood tall. And she looked at him, and saw a father holding grief in one hand, love in the other. That night there were no declarations, no touches, but something changed. They were no longer strangers, they were survivors. And Jack Avery, for the first time in years, didn't feel so alone. The storm outside didn't ease for 3 more days. But inside the cabin, something had begun. Quietly, beautifully, something like hope and of connection. Rachel stood by the counter, rubbing her hands together for warmth and resolve. "I think I'll try making biscuits this morning," she said softly, glancing toward the pantry, "unless the flours hardened into cement." Jack gave a quiet nod, gesturing toward the shelves stocked with basics. "Whatever's there is yours to use." And just like that, a quiet rhythm began to take shape within the cabin walls, an unspoken agreement, one that required no words, just presence. Jack spent his mornings splitting logs out back, letting the swing of the axe and the crunch of wood echo into the crisp air. Inside, Rachel worked the dough with steady hands, her sleeves pushed up, her concentration unwavering. The children, 5 in all, filled the air with bursts of laughter, whispered stories, and the shuffle of busy little feet. Even Caleb, Jack's quiet, withdrawn son, who usually moved like a ghost through the days, had begun to linger on the edges. He didn't speak, he didn't engage, but he was watching, and that was something. That morning, as Jack stood at the chopping block, he caught sight of Caleb peeking from behind the cabin's back door. The boy's arms were wrapped tightly around himself, more from habit than from the cold. Jack lowered the axe and glanced up. "Want to hand me a log?" he asked, not expecting much. To his surprise, Caleb hesitated only briefly, then stepped outside. With gloved hands, he picked up a small piece of wood and placed it carefully on the block. Jack didn't say anything. He simply raised the axe again, brought it down in one clean arc, and watched the log split. Caleb reached for another piece. Again and again the rhythm built. Swing, split, hand, repeat. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable now. It was purposeful, almost sacred, a quiet communion forged in the cold. Later, when they returned indoors, their cheeks red from the biting wind, the air inside wrapped around them like a memory. Warmth, butter, flour, something that smelled like hope. Rachel's biscuits weren't flawless. Some were singed at the bottom, others soft in the center, but Jack didn't care. "You made these?" he asked, sitting at the table. Rachel looked up, her cheeks tinged pink from the oven and the praise. "With help from the kids," she said, "and your son." Jack turned to Caleb, who quickly looked away. But for a fleeting second, the boy's lips twitched. Not a full smile, just the ghost of one. But it was there. They sat around the wooden table, elbows bumping, spoons clattering, voices overlapping. One of Rachel's boys asked if there were seconds. Someone dropped a utensil and laughed. The table was full, not just of food, but of life. Jack couldn't remember his cabin ever feeling so alive. Not crowded, just whole. After the meal, Rachel gathered the children for story time. Jack leaned in the doorway and watched as she brought the pages to life, shifting her voice for every character, drawing out giggles from all 5 children. Even Caleb let out a quiet chuckle, his first in what felt like forever. And in that moment something cracked open inside Jack. Not longing, not happiness, but something softer, like sunlight gently pressing through layers of old winter ice. Later, Rachel stepped out onto the porch beside Jack, 2 steaming mugs in hand. "They're happier here than they've been in months," she said. Jack looked at her, not just her face, but the breath that fogged in the cold air, the way her eyes rested on the mountains like they belonged to her. "So are you," he said. Rachel didn't argue. "There's something about this place," she said quietly. "It's raw, but it's safe." Jack took a sip from his mug. "Safe is more than I've had in a long time." She looked at him then, really looked, past the stubble and the fatigue, into the corners he kept hidden. "How did you end up here?" Jack didn't answer right away. When he finally did, his voice was barely above a whisper. "My wife, Lydia, she had breast cancer. We didn't catch it in time, and then she was just gone." Rachel's grip on her mug tightened. "I didn't know how to go on after that," Jack continued. "Caleb stopped talking. I stopped everything. We came here because here no one expected anything from us. Just the trees. Just the silence." Rachel's voice broke the quiet. "And now it's not just you." Jack nodded. "I know." They sat there for a long time, side by side, as snowflakes drifted down like tiny moments trying to cover what had been lost. That afternoon, Jack heard something he hadn't heard in years. Music. Just a few notes, hesitant and unsure. He stepped inside and saw Rachel kneeling by the old piano, coaxing out a tune. One chipped key, one flat note. Still, she played. "You Are My Sunshine." The children watched from a distance. Caleb stood closest. When she finished, Rachel looked up with a sheepish smile. "Sorry," she said. "I couldn't help myself." Jack shook his head. "Don't stop." She smiled and started again. And then something happened. Caleb took a step forward, then another. He stopped at the edge of the piano, hands fidgeting at his sides. And then, softly, uncertainly, his lips moved. "You are my sunshine, my only sunshine." Jack froze. He wasn't sure if he was imagining it. But then came the next line, and the next. Rachel's fingers paused, her eyes welled with tears. Jack sat down hard on a chair, his hands in his hair, overwhelmed by the moment. 2 years of silence, shattered by a song. Caleb glanced at his father, unsure. Jack stood, crossed the room, and wrapped him in an embrace so fierce it nearly buckled them both. Rachel turned away, giving them space, brushing her cheek with her sleeve. And Jack thought maybe the world hadn't ended when Lydia died. Maybe. It had just paused. Until now. But you know, I don't think it's the big losses that truly undo us. It's the small, quiet ones. the kind that slip through the cracks of everyday life. The ordinary pieces we once called home that suddenly aren't there anymore. Jack leaned back slowly in his chair, the wood creaking under his weight, his gaze distant. "I used to believe grief made us weak," he said softly, "but now I think it just makes us real." Rachel gave a tired, knowing smile, one that held years behind it. "It makes us human," she murmured. And then came the silence. Not the kind that stretches awkwardly, but the kind that fits like a blanket. A shared stillness, full, not empty. Then Caleb appeared in the doorway, clutching a folded piece of paper. He hesitated before offering it to Rachel, his fingers unsure but hopeful. "For me?" she asked gently. He nodded just once. She unfolded it carefully, inside a pencil sketch. 5 figures outside a snow-covered cabin nestled among tall trees. One woman with her hair tucked beneath a scarf, Rachel. Another tall figure, broad-shouldered, Jack. Between them stood 5 children, scattered like wildflowers. 2 girls, 2 boys. Caleb right in the center. Rachel's breath caught. "It's beautiful," she whispered, her voice shaky with emotion. Jack watched her, heart swelling. Caleb hadn't drawn for anyone outside their little 2-person bubble in years. That sketch, it wasn't just art. It was trust. It was a step forward. Rachel looked at the boy, her eyes wet. "Thank you." Caleb just shrugged, then wandered back to the living room. But Jack, still watching, spoke softly, almost reverently. "You're good for him." Rachel didn't look up. Her gaze remained on the drawing, fingers tracing the lines. "Maybe," she said quietly, "he's good for me too." Later that day, while the kids napped and Caleb read silently near the fire, Jack led Rachel out to the woodshed. The snow had hardened just enough to make walking manageable, and the sun made the high banks on either side of the path glisten like powdered diamonds. The woodshed creaked as they stepped inside. One entire wall was stacked high with perfectly chopped firewood, neat, orderly, methodical. Rachel took it in with an impressed whistle. "This is a lot," she said, eyebrows raised. Jack shrugged with a small smile. "Therapy," he said simply. "The colder I feel, the more I split." Rachel bent to lift a log, testing its weight. "I get that," she said. "When Dan got sick, I used to scrub the floors, not because they needed it, just because I needed it." Jack set the axe on the stump. "Want to try?" Rachel didn't hesitate. She stepped forward, gripped the axe with confidence, and brought it down in one smooth motion. The log split cleanly in 2. Jack raised an eyebrow. "Minnesota really does breed 'em tough," she smirked. "Winters did. They weeded out the lazy. They worked side by side for a while. The rhythm of the axe, the echo of cracking wood, it was steadying, like breath, like prayer." At one point, Jack paused and looked at her, a deeper kind of admiration in his eyes. "I haven't seen anyone stand this strong in a long time." Rachel wiped sweat from her brow. "I don't have much of a choice." He nodded slowly. "You do, though. You could have gone to a shelter, waited for help, given up." "I did ask for help," she said, looking him dead in the eye. "I just didn't expect it to come from a man in the middle of the woods, splitting logs." Jack laughed, a low, rough sound. But Rachel wasn't done. "I never wanted to be rescued, Jack. I just wanted a place where I didn't have to apologize for trying." He didn't speak, just met her gaze and held it. Then, with quiet certainty, he said the one thing that rang truer than anything else. "You don't have to apologize here." Rachel's breath hitched just slightly. She blinked away whatever threatened to rise and followed him back to the cabin, each carrying an armload of wood, but also something heavier and warmer between them, understanding. That night, over a stew made from whatever scraps they had, canned beef, potatoes, and bits of carrot, the children laughed with abandon. Caleb even rolled his eyes at one of the younger boys' jokes, which to Jack felt like witnessing a miracle. Rachel noticed too. Her eyes met Jack's across the table, and for a moment the noise faded. It was just them, 2 people who had fought to survive, who had stopped running just long enough to find something real. And deep in Jack's chest, something shifted. A question formed. Quiet, daring, not ready to be spoken aloud. Not yet, but soon. By week's end, the storm had eased. The roads were still buried, but the tension in the air had lifted. The cabin no longer felt like a shelter. It felt like home. Jack rose before dawn to fix things. Broken hinges, stubborn doors, anything that needed mending. Rachel was usually already up, baking with the older kids or scribbling lesson plans in her notebook. Caleb, still quiet, was no longer invisible. He sketched often now, always with the cabin in the background. Even in silence, he was telling them, "This is where I belong." One morning, while Jack cleaned the snow from his boots, Rachel set a tray of fresh cornbread on the counter. "I want to try selling these," she said. Jack looked up. "To who?" "There's a town at the base of the ridge, right? Maybe they have a farmer's market?" He nodded, cautious. "Small, locals mostly. Tough crowd." Rachel smiled, unbothered. "Tough I can handle. What I can't do is keep taking without trying to give something back." Jack sat down, leaning forward. "You're not taking. You've made this place warmer than it's been in years." She softened, but her voice held resolve. "That's kind of you, but kindness doesn't buy more flour." Jack looked at her, really looked. The quiet determination in her eyes. She didn't want pity. She wanted purpose. "I'll hitch the sled to the truck," he said. "We'll go together." The next morning, with the wind finally calmed and skies overcast, Jack drove Rachel and the children down the narrow road. The truck rattled with age, but it carried them to a tiny town, just a few buildings and a humble market square. Rachel set up her table with a red-checkered cloth. On it, neat stacks of cinnamon cornbread, apple muffins, and ginger biscuits. The kids bundled behind her, hopeful. Caleb stood off to the side with Jack, close but watchful. At first, people walked by without a glance. One man muttered something about outsiders. Rachel didn't flinch. She smiled, offered samples, answered questions. By midday, a woman tried a muffin. Her eyebrows rose. She called over a friend, then another. By noon, every item was gone. Jack watched her from a distance, arms crossed, hiding a grin. As they packed up, Rachel's cheeks were flushed, not just from the cold, but from something better. Pride. "I forgot what this felt like," she whispered. Jack turned. "Selling muffins?" She shook her head, smiling. "Standing up, being seen." He looked at her then, really looked, and wondered how long she'd gone unseen before this mountain gave her back to herself. They drove home in peaceful silence, kids asleep in the back. Rachel watching the trees, a quiet calm in her expression. That night, Jack built the fire high. The cabin shimmered with warmth. Rachel counted the crumpled bills from the day and laughed. Not because it was a fortune, but because it was hers. As they washed dishes together, Rachel said, "I think I could get used to this." Jack passed her a plate. "The baking or the market?" She looked at him. "Both, maybe more." He didn't push, didn't need to. The way she said it curled up inside his chest and stayed there. Days passed. Jack fixed, mended, and built. Rachel baked and taught and wrote. And slowly something permanent took root. One evening, as the guitar rested silently in its corner, Rachel asked, "Why haven't you left this place?" Jack didn't answer right away. "You had a life before, music, family. You could have gone anywhere." He stared at the fire. "Because this place never asked me to be anything but here. Out there, I couldn't be the man I used to be. But here, I could survive, raise Caleb, keep the roof on. That was enough." Rachel's voice lowered. "But what if surviving isn't enough anymore?" Jack turned to her, the firelight dancing across her face. "Then I'd have to learn how to live again," he said quietly, "and I'm not sure I remember how." Rachel didn't speak. She simply reached out and placed something in his hand, a still warm muffin wrapped in cloth. "Start with this," she said softly, a playful sparkle in her eyes. "It's easier than love." Jack laughed then, a deep, full-bodied laugh he hadn't let himself feel in years. And Rachel smiled, not because she'd given something, but because for the first time in so long she'd gotten something back. A connection, a beginning, a promise. Like bread, like trust, like love. If you're brave enough. A quiet reverence had fallen over the children, their wide eyes glistening with something unspoken. Though none of them said a word, it was as if they all intuitively sensed the significance of what had just happened. It felt like hallowed ground beneath their feet. Jack knelt down and gently gathered Caleb's small, chilled hands into his own calloused palms, rough from years of labor and loss. He didn't squeeze, just enclosed them tenderly, as though holding something fragile and precious. "I'm so proud of you," he said, his voice thick with feeling. Caleb lifted his gaze, and in that simple, silent moment, Jack saw something remarkable reflected back at him. It wasn't just courage in the eyes of his son, it was restoration, healing. A piece of Caleb, long buried beneath layers of silence and sorrow, had returned, carried home on the wings of a song. Without hesitation, Jack pulled the boy into a fierce, grateful embrace. Caleb didn't resist. He tucked his face into the familiar hollow of his father's shoulder and held on tight, as if he belonged there, as if he had always belonged. No words passed between them. None were needed. After what felt like time suspended, Rachel stepped forward and knelt beside them. She didn't speak either. She simply placed her hand lightly on Caleb's back, a quiet gesture, yet so grounding, so steadying, as if trying to anchor the sacredness of that moment in place, to keep it from drifting away. Jack met her eyes, and for the briefest of seconds something passed between them, something intangible but deeply intimate. It wasn't romance, not yet. It was something more fundamental. Recognition. The silent acknowledgement between two people who had just witnessed something miraculous. And not just witnessed, it had happened because of them. Together. Later that evening, when the children were finally tucked into sleep and the snow danced gently outside in slow spiraling flakes, Jack and Rachel stood beside the fire, the warmth flickering between them in quiet contemplation. "He hasn't sung since Lydia died," Jack said softly, his voice hoarse with memory. Not a word, not a note. Rachel nodded, but replied gently, "I didn't do that." Jack looked at her. "Yes, you did." She shook her head. "I just played an old song." "And you loved him," Jack said, his voice more certain now, without asking for anything in return. "That's more than most people ever do." Rachel turned away, blinking quickly to keep the emotion at bay. Jack watched her, his eyes full. "You've loved him every single day," he continued, "even when he couldn't give anything back. That's why he could sing tonight." Jack's throat tightened. That familiar ache, the one that only came when he was trying not to cry, rose again. He looked over at the guitar in the corner, silent and upright, as though waiting patiently. For years it had gathered dust. But now something had shifted. For the first time in a long time, Jack walked over and picked it up. The strings felt foreign under his fingers, stiff, unfamiliar, but the memory lived in his hands. Slowly, hesitantly, he strummed a soft chord, then another. Rachel, standing at the table, watched him with quiet awe. "You're going to make me cry again," she said, a soft smile tugging at her lips. Jack chuckled. "No promises." He began to play an old lullaby, simple, Appalachian, passed down from his father. Nothing polished, nothing perfect. But it filled the cabin, wrapping around them like a warm quilt. And with each note, something inside him, some tightly wound grief, began to loosen. It wasn't that the sorrow disappeared. Lydia's absence still hurt. It always would. But now there was space beside the ache, room for something new to grow, hope. Rachel stepped closer. "Keep going," she whispered. So, he did. And for the first time in years, Jack Avery didn't feel like he was just enduring winter. He felt like he was singing it back to life. The next morning, the sun came out in full, bright and unwavering. Not just a pale flicker behind the clouds, but a warm, golden glow that turned every snowflake into glitter. The trees sparkled. Icicles caught the light and chimed in the breeze. And for the first time in what felt like forever, the mountain no longer resembled a prison. It looked like a playground. Jack stepped out onto the porch, hands on his hips, surveying the slope just beyond the tree line. It wasn't steep, but it curved gently, just right for sledding. "You ever been sledding?" he called over his shoulder. Rachel stepped out behind him, wrapping her scarf tighter. Her cheeks were already pink with cold. "With what sled?" she teased, eyeing the contraption. "The luxury model," Jack replied, deadpan. "Splintered lumber and bungee cords." She laughed. "Hey," Jack said, feigning offense, "that thing's held together by faith and duct tape. Show some respect." The kids tumbled out, bursting with joy. Even Caleb had a new lightness in his step, a glint Jack hadn't seen in years. They gathered around the homemade sled, a ridiculous-looking thing patched together from old barn planks and the base of a broken wheelbarrow. But to the children, it was magic. A sleigh straight from Santa's workshop. "All right," Jack announced, 2 at a time, 1 adult, 1 kid. "I'm going with Mr. Jack," one of Rachel's daughters shouted. "No fair. I called it first." Another protested. Rachel leaned close, grinning. "Looks like you're a hit." Jack laughed, surprised by the warmth rising in his chest. "Guess I better not crash." For the next hour, the mountain rang with laughter, loud, unrestrained, healing. Rachel screamed all the way down the hill with her youngest in her lap. Jack took turns with each child. Even Caleb climbed aboard, silent but determined. As they flew downhill, wind roaring past, Caleb threw his head back and let out a laugh, full, unguarded, alive. Jack almost forgot to steer, stunned by the sound. By the time they trudged back, soaked in snow and flushed with joy, they were breathless. Rachel's hair had escaped her hat, curling in damp spirals around her face. Jack caught himself watching, not just looking, but seeing. Not just a mother, not just a survivor, a woman alive with possibility. Inside, they peeled off wet clothes and hung gloves to dry by the fire. Rachel stirred cocoa with a wooden spoon like she was brewing something sacred. Jack handed out mismatched mugs one by one, the cabin filled with the hum of contentment. "I don't think this place has ever been that loud," Jack said. Rachel smiled. "Good loud. The best kind." They stood in the hush that followed, watching the children nestled together, sleepy and satisfied. Then Rachel spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Do you ever wonder if it's okay to feel this?" Jack turned. This kind of happiness, after everything." He didn't answer right away. Instead, he motioned for her to sit. She did. "For a long time," Jack said slowly, "I thought that being happy again meant betraying Lydia, like moving forward meant I was leaving her behind." Rachel nodded, tears threatening. "I feel that too, about Dan. Like if I start something new, it means what we had wasn't real." "But it was real," Jack said gently, "and so is this." Rachel looked down. "I'm scared to hope." Jack's voice was soft. "Me too." The fire crackled, the snow outside shimmered. Rachel met his eyes again. "So what do we do?" Jack's answer came easily. "We keep sledding. We keep baking. We keep showing up. And if the hope gets too loud, we let it." She let out a quiet laugh. "You make it sound easy." "It's not," Jack said, "but maybe it's worth it." She didn't reply. Instead, she reached across the table and took his hand, just a squeeze. But in that one gentle act, everything was said. "I see you, I trust you. I'm still scared, but maybe, just maybe, I'm ready to believe again." That night, long after the house had gone still, Jack stepped outside. The stars had returned, cold, sharp, infinite. He let the silence sink into his bones. Rachel joined him, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. They stood together in that vast quiet, side by side. "What do you see?" Jack asked, eyes on the horizon. Rachel thought for a moment. "Something wild," she said, "but not dangerous anymore." Jack smiled. "Yeah, that sounds right." She turned to him. "What about you?" He looked at her and after a long pause said softly, "I see a reason to stay." Rachel's eyes flickered, then softened. She nodded, and in the hush that followed, nothing else needed to be spoken. Because sometimes love doesn't crash in like thunder. Sometimes it arrives on a handmade sled, in cocoa-stained mugs, with children's laughter echoing under a starlit sky. They might not carry memories of the freezing nights or the makeshift meals. Perhaps the details of survival would fade over time. But maybe, just maybe, they would remember the warmth that laughter brought. The song sung softly by firelight. The scent of burning wood curling through the cabin like comfort. Jack smiled at the thought, nodding gently. Or the sound of a guitar, he added, played too slowly by a man who forgot half the chords. Rachel rose, quietly walked over and reached for the guitar, her hands tender as they took it from his. "I think," she said softly, "you remember just enough." She lowered herself onto the hearth, her back straight but her heart open. When she played, it was not for an audience. It was for the fire, for the silence, for the memory of all they'd endured. Her fingers moved with grace, her eyes half lost in the melody, something aged, something sure, something that reminded Jack of what home might really mean. When the last note faded, silence lingered like snowfall. Then Jack's voice broke it, quiet but clear. "I made a promise," he said. "This morning, to Caleb, to myself, that I wouldn't just survive. I'd live, really live, become someone who's more." Rachel turned to him, her eyes searching, then softening. "You already are," she said. He dropped his gaze for a moment, as if the weight of her words were too sacred to meet head-on. Then he looked back at her. "I want to be someone who can carry this. All of it. You. Them. Not just for a season." She rose slowly, crossing the distance between them with quiet certainty. Sitting beside him on the worn wooden floor, she reached out and repeated herself, her voice now a hush. "You already are." Jack extended his hand, not out of urgency or longing, but with the calm patience of a man who had once coaxed a flame out of damp wood, a man who knew the silence of the forest and the hush of hope. Their fingers met, not clinging, just resting, and in that shared touch, words became unnecessary. Because some promises are not made with vows or declarations. Some are built silently, through actions, through hands that chop firewood and hearts that never give up. It happened on a Thursday. The sky was a perfect unbroken blue. No wind, no bird call, just the sacred stillness of the woods wrapped around the cabin like a blessing. Jack was by the woodshed, splitting the last of the dry oak logs. Caleb stood beside him, handing over each piece in practiced rhythm. Then came the sound, the unmistakable crunch of tires over snow. Not a deer, not the wind. Something heavier, intentional. Jack froze mid-swing, eyes locking with Caleb's. Alert, watching, listening. From the road, a dust-covered SUV emerged, climbing slowly up the drive like something out of a forgotten past. Jack's gut tightened. No one came here by accident. Rachel appeared at the cabin door, drying her hands on a dish towel. She stopped cold when she saw the vehicle. From it stepped a sharply dressed woman with a clipboard and a man in city boots. Jack moved to meet them halfway. "Can I help you?" he asked, voice steady as an anchor. "Mr. Avery," the woman began, her smile polished but impersonal. "Amanda Doyle, Social Placement Coordinator, State of Idaho. We've been trying to locate a Rachel Whitmore." Jack tensed. Rachel stepped up beside him, calm but firm. "That's me." Amanda blinked. "We weren't expecting to find you, this far off grid. You've been listed as missing since November." "I wasn't missing," Rachel said evenly. "I was surviving." Amanda shifted her weight. "I understand. We're not here to disrupt anything, but the shelter you checked into in Boise flagged your absence. There was an employment opportunity, housing, support, but you never returned." Rachel's jaw clenched. The offer was rescinded. No job, no housing, no support. "Well," Amanda replied, "the position is open again. The school is willing to take you, full benefits, and if needed, we'd place the children into permanent foster care." Jack felt Rachel lean slightly into him, just a flicker. The clipboard woman kept speaking, offering transportation, timelines, decisions. Then Jack's voice cut through, low, certain. "She's not vulnerable." Amanda blinked again, caught off guard. "Excuse me? She's capable," Jack said. "She kept 4 kids alive through a snowstorm. She taught them, fed them, made bread from nothing. Don't speak of her like someone to be placed. She's someone to be stood beside." Amanda hesitated. "We'll return tomorrow for your decision." The SUV disappeared down the drive like a ghost. Inside, the cabin felt heavier. Rachel sat at the kitchen table, hands clasped, staring into silence. Jack stood across from her. After a long moment, Rachel spoke. "It's a real offer." Jack nodded. "Housing, a job, a future." He nodded again. "You think I should go?" "No," he said. "I think you should choose." She looked up, her voice almost cracking. "What if I choose wrong?" Jack pulled out the chair and sat down across from her. "Then at least you'll have done something braver than most." She laughed, a little broken, a little relieved. The thought of going back, it's like slipping into someone else's skin. Their name, their schedule, their rules. And staying, she looked around. The firelight, the herbs over the window, the laughter from the children's room. "It scares me more," she whispered, "because I want it." Jack reached for her hand. "Then fight for it." That night neither of them slept. They sat by the fire, letting the flames say the words they couldn't. After midnight, Caleb came from the bedroom, sketchpad in hand. He handed it to Rachel. On the page, the cabin, only different, expanded. A wide porch, a garden, smoke drifting from the chimney. 5 children playing in the yard, a guitar resting on a rocking chair. 2 tall figures drawn in the center side by side. Rachel stared, then whispered, "He sees it too." The next morning, Amanda returned. Rachel met her on the porch, papers still untouched. "I'm not going," she said before Amanda could speak. "Are you sure this is stable?" Amanda asked. "This is my option," Rachel said firmly. "I'm not asking to be saved. I'm asking to live where I'm already seen, where my kids are already home." Amanda studied her. "Most people don't turn down rescue." Rachel smiled. "That's because most people haven't already been saved." The car pulled away. Rachel turned and saw Jack waiting. "They wanted to give us a future," she said. Jack looked at her. "You already built one." And in that moment, nothing was missing. Not a contract, not the past, just the sound of wind in the trees and her hand in his. Spring didn't burst onto the mountains. It crept in quietly, like someone who hoped they were welcome. Snow melted slow. The earth woke gently. Jack was in the garden, hands in the damp soil, planting the seeds Rachel had kept safe all winter. She stepped out onto the porch, cheeks flushed, 2 mugs in hand. "You're starting early," she teased. "If I don't, these carrots will be the size of toothpicks by July." She laughed, a sound that no longer felt like a surprise. It belonged here now. The children spilled out the door like sunlight, voices bright, jackets mismatched. Caleb trailed behind with a chalkboard. "Are we really doing school outside today?" one of the boys asked. Rachel nodded. "If you can do math with bugs in your face, life's going to be a breeze." Jack grinned. Caleb hung back. "You okay?" Jack asked. "I want to teach them something," Caleb said. "A song. One Mom taught me." Jack placed a steady hand on his son's shoulder. "She'd be proud of both of us." That evening, after the chaos of bedtime, Jack and Rachel sat on the porch. The guitar between them, stars overhead, her fingers plucked a tune. "I never thought I'd end up here," Jack said. "And now? I can't imagine anywhere else. I want to stay," she said suddenly. "Not until fall. Not until the firewood runs out. Really stay." Jack looked at her. "You already have. I don't want to be someone you rescued," she added. "I want to be someone you build with." "Good," he said. "Because I don't need rescuing. I need someone to walk beside me, through mud, through snow, through carrot-sized failures." She laughed again, then quieted. "Do you think it's possible to make a forever home out of a place that started it in survival?" He looked back at the cabin, at the golden light in the windows, the echo of laughter, and said, "I think it already is." The next morning, the frost still clung to the earth. Jack stepped outside with coffee in hand and found Rachel already there, wrapped in a blanket, gazing at the mountains. Without turning, she said, "There's something about this place. It doesn't just hold you. It transforms you.